welcome to Botkin Plus. I'm Nancy Groce, and I'm here with my colleague Steve Winick with the American Folklife Center, and we're here with Professor Andrea Kitta, following a great talk she's just given for the Botkin series, and we just wanted to follow up your talk on conspiracies and non-conspiracies and the whole idea of belief in our society, with some questions about how you got interested and what you're working on now and anything else you'd like to add. So,
okay. Great. Happy to be
the
here.
Welcome
Thank
to
you.
the library.
Thank you so much.
Can we start by asking how you got interested in this topic?
This topic, I think it was something I was always interested in. At a very young age, I was hearing about conspiracy theory, and it was one of those things that I was really attracted to that, I think like many people are, to the just the drama of it. It's kind of silly to say it in that way, but I love this idea that it was this big dramatic thing, and it was exciting, and there was all this hidden information, and I was so excited by that idea, even as a small child, that I think it was pretty natural that I ended up kind of sliding into the interest in it and why people believed in it. So yeah, once I became a folklorist and realized, oh, I can really study this. I can actually really look at this and study it. It was an obvious place for me to work with. So I've always enjoyed these sort of fringe theories and all of this, because there's an enjoyment in it too. And I think that gets so disconnected from it because they're so loaded and they mean so much, especially in the past few years. And so trying to find the joy in them again, I think is important.
Did you write your dissertation on this topic?
No, I actually wrote my dissertation on vaccination. so on vaccination discourse. So there was some conspiracy theory in there. So yeah, just a lot of legend and a little bit of conspiracy theory as well.
And this was at Memorial, Newfoundland?
Yes, Memorial University in Newfoundland, yes.
So one of the things that's interesting is, as folklorists, it becomes clear to us what the connections are between belief studies and health, public health, and also individual health decisions, which is implicated in the vaccination question, but also some of these conspiracy theories. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, vaccination it's such an interesting topic because there's so many things loaded about the topic itself. When you talk about vaccines, you're also talking about parenthood, you're talking about raising children, you're talking about all of these other complicated issues that are part of belief system. So that idea that's so deeply embedded, especially into the parenting culture, of being a good parent, and what does it mean to be a good parent, also gets involved in this. So it becomes this really loaded question of, what's the right thing to do? So is it the right thing to do, vaccinate your child and do what you're told to do, or is the right thing to do, fight against that? Is it, making sure that everything you put into your children is natural, or, all these other ideas that kind of go along with medicine and with nature and and what how we can conceive of the term natural. So it gets so deeply embedded, and a lot of people don't realize that the simple I'm not getting my kids vaccinated because I don't believe in it has all these other parts to it, and it ends up being this really complicated issue.
Well, during COVID, you were very much on demand. Can you talk a little bit about being a folklorist and a scholar, and then having such a high visibility public role?
Yeah, that was a lot. It was one of the things I did not think about when I was started to study this. Was if I studied a pandemic, that means I also had to live through it. So I don't know why I never made that connection. But yeah, it was a difficult time, and I think because so many people just wanted good information. And I wanted to provide them with that good information, but I was also a folklorist too. So that tension there of saying, well, here are the things that are true and not true, but also as a folklorist, it's interesting, why we believe the things we do and all of the complicated cultural issues that come in there. But so many people just wanted truth or not truth. And so it became really hard to show that complexity in a lot of different ways. So so I spent a lot of time trying to do that, and sometimes being successful and sometimes not. But it was a very loaded time, I think, for everyone. And so being the folklorist when these things were coming out. It meant that I did a lot of news stories, a lot of podcasts. I was definitely in demand in a lot of different places. The downside too of doing things during a pandemic is all those great places that you could go to. I didn't get to go to because there was a pandemic. I also didn't think about that. So that was a little disappointing. I did a lecture in Australia and I didn't get to go to Australia.
So in addition to sort of health belief, you've studied supernatural belief quite a bit, including Slender Man, but other kinds of supernatural beliefs. So talk a little about your work in that area.
Yeah, that work is always interesting to me, just because I am fascinated by belief and what motivates people and why they believe the things they do. So I think there is a lot of beauty in the supernatural as well, in how complex it is and how interesting it is what people believe and why they believe it. And right now, one of the things I'm doing is I'm studying, I don't have a great terminology yet. Right now, I've been calling them small stories, but I'm not studying the big supernatural event, like the big thing that you saw, the full apparition. I'm studying the stories that are the little ones, the ones where you feel the presence of a loved one that's passed. You smell their perfume or cologne. You just have the general feeling that they're around you. And I think those stories are the most interesting, both because they have so much meaning. They have so much meaning for individuals, especially when a lot of people are dying of COVID, and this might be one of their last experiences with the individual. But also because I think they're actually the core of the belief. I don't think it's the big supernatural event that makes you believe in the supernatural. I think it's all the little tiny ones that kind of add up. So that's been really fascinating to study and look at how, and how people tell that story too, because it's so personal. It's their relationship with another person that is what they're really ultimately talking about, and how much they miss that person. So it's an honor and a privilege to be told these stories, but they're also very fascinating because they're everywhere. And I think that's what's fascinating about them, is even people who will say, "Oh, I don't believe in the supernatural, but I do believe my grandma came to visit me after she died," but I don't believe in the supernatural. So I think that's a really an interesting way too that we talk about it.
And do you ask after those stories to elicit them, or
I do sometimes.
Yeah. Field work, I guess.
Yeah, the fieldwork in that, the fieldwork in that is hard. But a lot of times I find that when I tell people what I study, they just open up about them. So they want to talk about those stories, especially if they find out I know about the supernatural, or I study the supernatural. And so they want to tell, people want to tell their ghost stories, but they will wait till the end of the night. They'll wait till everybody's maybe had a drink, and then the ghost stories come out. But yeah, there's a real desire. I think people want to share those stories because of how meaningful they are, but they also want me to say, "You're normal, right? You're fine. There's nothing wrong with you." They want me to kind of reinforce that what is happening to them isn't something bad. They think and know in themselves that it's good. But they just want external validation on that no, this is a thing that happens to a lot of people. People, get a lot of comfort out of it, and that's okay that you do too. Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about your family background, and I wonder how that played into your becoming a folklorist and
Yes.
the things that you study.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I definitely grew up with a family that was interested, at least, in some of these topics, and they were definitely interested in the supernatural. So I think that definitely has played into it. But also just having a family that was incredibly open-minded and that were readers. I come from a long line of readers. And so I was taught at a very young age, if you don't know something, there's a book on it. So go to the library, go find the book, go look at this. So I think that's been a huge part of this for me as well, is that. But also listening to the stories of just regular people. I was taught that, that yes, there are authorities and there are people who, write books and are interesting, but you should also listen to individuals too. What people think and what they have to say is also important. So I think that also influenced me a lot.
Did you have any family ghost stories?
Oh, no. Yeah, there's been a couple that I've heard about, but some of them are I'm not allowed to share. So, but I have heard, I've gotten a lot of ghost stories. I grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania, which for the longest time in a Google search, if you put in "why is Pennsylvania so haunted," was the first thing that came up. So I always thought that was really funny. But yeah, so there's a lot of local stories, but I also grew up in a culture that there was a haunted hayride like 5 minutes from my house. There was a lot of these haunted things to go to. There's all these local stories. So it was really interesting to see that and to hear about those. And then realize as I got to be a folklorist, like, oh, this is that thing. This is the thing that we're talking about in class. I didn't realize that I already knew this stuff. And that's one of the best parts about being a folklorist, though, is it's something I always tell my students, too, is you are already an expert in folklore. You just don't know it yet, so.
Right, and you're an expert on folklore, and you can teach me a lot.
Yeah.
And that gets, that's
exactly, yeah.
ways of getting them to tell you folklore.
Yeah, absolutely.
But one of the things that's interesting, you started out your lecture with a TV commercial. And one of the things that's interesting about conspiracy theories and legends and the kind of complex of stories that we're talking about is that they are spread so much in the media.
Yes.
So how do you integrate kind of looking at media into your approach to this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the media is so important in this because they both spread and they try to disprove some of it as well. So you see a lot of that happening in the media. And that, it does make it difficult because certain people, I think we don't think of necessarily as everything that is on the news is fact anymore. I think there was a point when we did, but not so much anymore. So I think that's kind of shifted over time. I feel like when I first started teaching especially, I was saying to students like, okay, well, not everything you hear on the news is true. Like, that sometimes they haven't done the proper checks, or they're reporting these stories. And now I don't have to say that. My students know that everything that they hear is not necessarily true. But having that media analysis is so important as a part of this because we can see how the spread happens, how things get around. But we can also look at it and think about how people are processing information, and I think that's really important because when we see something, it's people don't just wake up one day and believe in ghosts, right? Something happens to them. They see something on the news. It becomes that echo chamber that we talk a lot about with conspiracy theory, and they hear it over and over again, and then it starts to feel more and more real the more they hear it. So that's a really important part of these echo chambers that happen with conspiracy theory is what is happening in the individual, what information are they getting, and that happens to all of us, I think, because the way media is set up now, we can really tailor it to what we want to hear, right? What we want to listen to. So we might not get the opposing viewpoints as readily or as easily as we used to in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So can I ask what you're working on now?
Absolutely. Yes, so the conspiracy theory book is coming out soon.
And the title of that?
That's The Whispers in the Echo Chamber. So that's an edited collection by myself and Jesse Fivecoat. And so I have that. I'm also working on the small ghost stories that I mentioned. So I have something, hopefully, that'll be coming out about that. I just turned in some things for that. And I also have another book, another edited collection that Tom Old and I are working on about basically applied folklore is essentially what it is, but it's specifically about academics doing applied folklore and how we reach groups of people and how, even though I think sometimes when we think of academia, we think we're kind of in our own echo chamber, right? We're only talking to each other, but we do actually do a lot of outreach, and we reach other people other than maybe the ones that people anticipate that we'll reach. It's not just our students, it's the community at large. It's going out and doing the kind of work in the communities, and that's happening. So it's been fun to see how many different ways my fellow folklorists the research they're doing and how they're applying it to real everyday life situations. It's been amazing. So I've always been one of those people that feels that we should never just do research for the sake of doing the research. We should do the research for some sort of greater good, or to give it back to people, or to make a difference in some sort of way. So this has been really great to be able to work on something like that.
Great, and that sort of brings up the question of the ethics of what we do.
Yes.
Which I know was very important to you during the pandemic, when getting ideas about vaccination out there was an important thing.
Yeah.
How do you approach that big topic?
Yeah, it's a very big topic, and yeah, that's something I've thought a lot about, especially during the pandemic, was being in that situation where I was sort of being both a medical educator, but also a folklorist, and and being torn in that, because I recognized that what people wanted was facts. They wanted information, and information from somebody they could trust, and realizing that people trusted me, which is lovely to know, but is also, it's a social pressure. So it was hard, though, to kind of go back and forth between those two jobs. And I kind of had to realize in the moment that I had to be what people needed me to be. Mm-hmm. That was more important than necessarily doing the work I wanted to do. So there were times where I could say, okay, this is the information that we have now. This is what we have going forward. Now let me make it more complicated. Now let me tell you something else, something that's important to folklorists. So it ended up being a great way to kind of bring folklore into the conversation when I was having a different conversation. So, but ethically it's difficult because, how do you, especially with somebody like me, I am pro-vaccine, and I've been studying vaccine for a long time, and I've been, at one point I was not as open about that, just because I didn't want people to feel like they were going to be dismissed. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be more open to them and let them know that I was going to listen to them. But then when something like a pandemic happens, you kind of get forced into saying, no, this is the kind of work I'm doing. I am pro-vaccine. But I felt that ethically was what I had to do. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of gray area there too, right? Where it's, where does my own personal ethics come in? Where does the ethics of the field come in? And a lot of other things. So yeah, that's something I think about a lot. I constantly ask myself, is what I'm doing ethical? Is it honoring that other person? And sometimes the answer is no. And then I have to stop, or I have to change what I'm doing, yeah. And I have to rethink that. But sometimes the answer is, it is right now, and I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I really don't know how your words can be used against you too. That's another part of this too, that we sometimes have to think about, especially in a world of deep fakes and all of these other things, that sometimes your words can be used against you, or even your voice can be used against you.
Sure. Mm.
So is there anything else that we haven't asked that you'd like to?
Oh, that's a good question. No, I can't think of anything in particular.
Well, Andrea, thank you so much for coming and giving a terrific lecture. Thank you. We will be in touch with you and look forward to your book, which is coming out soon, I trust, and also hearing what you study next.
Yes, thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure to be here.
Dr. Andrea Kitta, thank you so much. And I should say, if you come across this video on the Library of Congress website in isolation, then you should know that there's also a lecture video, and they'll be put together in a blog on Folklife Today, but you can also find them both on the Library of Congress website.